U.S. Marine admits his unit killed innocent Iraqi civilians. We can't believe this propaganda, can we? It's from Middle East Online, written by Stephen Collinson in Toronto.
Sounds like Arab propaganda.
Right. A former U.S. Marine said yesterday his unit killed more than 30.
About 30, man.
More than 30 innocent Iraqi civilians in just 2 days, in graphic testimony to a Canadian tribunal probing an asylum claim by a U.S. Army deserter. Marine Sergeant Jimmy Massey appeared as a witness to bolster claims by fugitive paratrooper Jeremy Hinsman that he walked out on the 82nd Airborne Division to avoid being ordered to commit war crimes in Iraq. Hinsman, 26, claims he would face persecution if sent home to the U.S. in a politically charged case which could set a precedent for at least 2 other U.S. deserters seeking asylum in Canada, Massey told Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board, the IRB, that men under his command in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine, killed 30-plus civilians within 48 hours while on checkpoint duty in Baghdad. I do know that we killed innocent civilians, Massey told the tribunal, relating the chaotic days after the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in March 2003. Massey said that in some incidents, Iraqi civilians were killed by between 200 and 500 rounds pumped into 4 separate cars, which each failed to respond to a single warning shot and respond to hand signals at a Baghdad checkpoint. At the time, U.S. soldiers feared suicide bombers would try to ram checkpoints, he said. Searches found no weapons in the vehicles or evidence that those killed were anything but innocent civilians, Massey said. He also said Marines killed 4 unarmed demonstrators and more Iraqis the next day during another spell of checkpoint duty in the occupied Iraqi capital. I was never clear on who the enemy was and who was not, Massey said. Kind of sounds like Vietnam all over again, doesn't it?
No, it's
when you don't know who the enemy is, what are you doing there? Asked the 12-year Marine, later honorably discharged from the service with severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Hinsman earlier argued in the tribunal, which started on Monday and was due to end today, that he gradually realized after joining the Army in 2001 that he could not bring himself to kill another person. I was faced with being deployed to Iraq to do what the infantry does, kill people, and I had no justification for doing so, Hinsman said. Hinsman and his wife and 2-year-old son arrived in Canada earlier this year after deserting from his unit, an action which carries a maximum 5-year term in jail. The South Dakota-born soldier is claiming refugee status, based on the contention that he was right to refuse to fight in a war which he says was illegal and violated human rights and the Geneva Conventions. He also claims he would face persecution if returned home to face desertion charges. Hinsman first requested conscientious objector status in 2002 before learning he was to be posted in Afghanistan, where he eventually made 18 combat parachute jumps. The following year, the request was rejected, and late in 2003, he learned he was to be deployed in Iraq, prompting his flight to Canada. Odds against him winning the case are slim. You hear that? Odds against him winning the case are slim, as no such verdict has ever been handed to a U.S. soldier here or to a combatant in a non-conspiracy conscription army. The IRB was is that? I'm not sure I'm reading that right. Odds against him winning the case are slim. Oh, I see. As no such verdict has ever been handed to a U.S. soldier here or to a combatant in a non-conspiracy army, the IRB was set up to consider the merits of refugee claims at arm's length from the Canadian government. Presiding member Brian Goodman signaled yesterday he would ask for written submissions from Hinsman's counsel, a government lawyer and refugee officer, thereby ruling out a judgment on the case today. Goodman will decide whether Hinsman would face persecution if sent back to the U.S. by dint of political or religious beliefs or a status as an objector to U.S. military action. The judgment will also question whether Hinsman will face cruel and unusual punishment during what would likely be a long prison term. There you go. When in doubt, come to Canada, eh? Greg Palast writes, Greg Palast, who went to Europe, to England, because the American media wouldn't print all of his very true observations in columns and things, so he had to work for the BBC. He writes, I just stepped out of my black helicopter to read that one of my favorite journalists, David Corn, had attacked my analyzation of the vote in Ohio as the stuff of grassy knoll conspiracy theorists. Oh my, and all because I wrote that the uncounted ballots in Ohio, more than 250,000 designated spoiled or provisional, undoubtedly contained enough votes to overturn George Bush's so-called victory margin of 136,000, which then, of course, after he wrote this, turned out to be just 119,000. Corn says Palast wrongly assumes that an overwhelming majority of these ballots contain votes for Kerry. Now, why would I think such a thing? Maybe because the precinct-by-precinct analysis of spoiled votes, those which machines can't count, by Professor Mark Salling of Cleveland State University, the unchallengeable expert in Ohio on voting demographics, concludes that spoiled punch cards in Ohio cities came overwhelmingly from African-American neighborhoods. The Republican Secretary of State of Ohio doesn't disagree, by the way. He intends to fix the Jim Crow voting problem in Ohio sometime after the next inaugural ball. The second group of uncounted ballots, provisionals, were also generated substantially in African-American areas, the direct result of a Republican program to hunt down, challenge, and suppress the votes cast in black-majority precincts. What happened in Ohio is 1/50th of a nationwide phenomenon, the non-count of African-American votes, about 1 million of them marked as unreadable in a typical presidential race. I will admit, David, I can't tell you exactly how each of these disenfranchised voters would have cast their ballots. Indeed, one Republican statistician claims these uncounted ballots are cast mostly by African-American supporters of George Bush. Nevertheless, most of us conspiracy nuts on the grassy knoll hold to our wild belief that most black citizens whose ballots were spoiled or rejected try to vote for the tall guy from Massachusetts. Who could that be?
John F. Kennedy.
He couldn't be thinking about him, could he? Just stop and think about what I said, man. That whole thing with his position on the war. That was the chigger in the woodpile right there. He'd have won hands down your pants if he would have been like, said it like it was. And he certainly could have had the option of changing his mind, said that this was a bloodbath and a nightmare and a quagmire, and it was wrong from the first place. But he bada-beep, bada-boop, bada-bada. That was the end.
Typical politician, going
That's
where
right.
the wind blows.
That is right. Typical slippery politician who got caught in a box. They nailed him on that, and that was the end of him. That was the end. I mean, you can talk about the Swift old veterans ads and this and that, but that was it. Just like Hubie Humphrey, old Hubie there back in '68. Too late. And it wasn't so great, because then we got Nixon. Robert Shear writes, well, I'm doing a lot of reading this hour, and you know what? I'm going to continue.
Good. Do it.
Well, no, I got a lot of fish to fry here, man. I got a lot of fish. Oh, and don't forget to look for the QM van right now at Albertsons, located at 1181 South University Drive and Plantation, right there by Peters Road. Stop by to sample Klaus Holler beer and register to win a golf getaway to the Bahamas. And then don't forget this afternoon, join George Miguel and Boca Bryan for happy hour, 5 to 7 at Treasure Island, right off the Palmetto, just north of the 122nd Street exit. Stop by to check out this week's feature, Harley, and win some prizes. Win some crap. Robert Shear writes in the LA Times, Pakistan and the true WMD threat. What have I been telling you about Pakistan, baby, and the Saudis? The Pakis and the Saudis and the Packers, that's where it's at. And we're in Iraq. Robert Shear says if it had even been a primitive nuclear weapon that hit the World Trade Center 3 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people would have died instead of fewer than 3,000, and the free society we enjoy almost certainly would have been a casualty as well. In the shock of that moment, the administration probably would have created a national network of detention camps for suspected terrorists, and military retaliation might have included the launch of nuclear missiles with the capability of killing millions. All of which is exactly why it was so terrifying to read in an investigative article in the LA Times on Saturday that our allies in Pakistan, who have done so much to spread nuclear weapons technology in recent years, are still capable of doing so. Senior investigators said they were especially worried that dangerous elements of the illicit network of manufacturers and suppliers would remain undetected and capable of resuming operations once international pressures eased, the Times reported. The article dissected the inability of investigators worldwide to fully penetrate the illicit nuclear weapons bazaar, which was run until last year by Pakistan's top nuclear scientist, Abdul Qadir Khan. Khan is currently under the protection of Pakistan's military dictator, President Pervert Musharraf, the same man who pardoned Khan and refuses to allow foreign investigators to speak with him, yet it was Musharraf whom President Bush spent the weekend praising and accommodating. As the Times article made clear, what officials call the world's worst case of nuclear proliferation, in which sophisticated nuclear technology was supplied to Libya, Iran, and other rogue nations, never would have been possible without the support of the Pakistani military. This is the same complex and powerful organization that made Pakistan a dictatorship in 1999 in a coup by Musharraf. Yet within 2 years of this coup, Bush dropped U.S. sanctions against Pakistan, showing clear disregard for international non-proliferation restraints. The rationale then and now was Pakistan's alleged support in the war on terrorism after 9/11. And despite the exposure of the Khan black market ring, nothing has changed. In a White House meeting Friday, Bush honored Musharraf, who since seizing power has purged his country's Supreme Court and rewritten its constitution, as a courageous leader. The administration again hastened to explain that Musharraf was vital in the 3-year effort to capture Osama bin Laden dead or alive, as Bush frequently has proclaimed. How embarrassing, then, when hours later Musharraf conceded in a Washington Post interview that bin Laden's trail had grown completely cold, but that the arch-terrorist is still very much alive and functioning. Musharraf complained that attempts to pin bin Laden and his al-Qaeda operatives have been seriously undermined by what he politely called voids in U.S. troop commitments to the area, which are equal to a mere 15% of the U.S. forces in Iraq. The U.S. strategy instead has been to rely on Pakistan's military to trap bin Laden, a dependence that Bush administration officials have cited while refusing to pressure for access to Khan. Musharraf complains that calls for international access to Khan show a lack of trust in Pakistan, but his real problem is the scientist's enormous popularity as the father of Pakistan's nuclear bomb program. Khan has been a hero for the masses, said the general, who has survived several assassination attempts and faces the possibility of a revolt if he tilts far toward the west, too far. Meanwhile, Bush is so eager to cater to Musharraf that he's even championing the dictator as the key to the creation of a democratic Palestinian state that is truly free. One that's got an independent judiciary, one that's got a civil society, one that's got the capacity to fight off the terrorists, one that allows for dissent, one in which people can vote, and President Musharraf can play a big role in helping achieve that objective, he said. What balderdash! None of these conditions of a free society exist in Pakistan, nor are they likely anytime soon in U.S.-occupied Iraq. Yet, while we chase the idea of democratizing the Islamic world through the use of force, the true cost of this crusade can be measured by our indifference to our original justification for the Iraq invasion, stopping the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And there's no margin for error here. Next time, the terrorists could take Manhattan and a whole lot more. Robert Sherry's pretty good. Great. L.A. Times. One of those commie pinko leftists, from the left coast. You know that type.
Yeah.
113 at 560 WQAM, the House. An 8-year-old girl was suspended for 9 days for bringing to school what appeared to be about 30...
About 30, man!
Jello Shots, though it was unclear whether they contained alcohol. Gee, I bet you Rick Riley wishes he would have been there. That's all he ever talked about between the stock market was Jello Shots,
I had no idea.
And rednecky stuff. The incident occurred November 29th as the girl stood after classes outside Geraldine Boudreaux Elementary School in Terrytown, a New Orleans suburb. A teacher spotted liquid dripping out of the student's book bag and found what looked like the small cups of alcohol-laced gelatin that are sold in bars, school spokeswoman Jeff Nakowski said. Nowakowski, some Polish guy. The girl told the principal that her mother, who works in a bar, makes alcoholic shots at home and sells them at work. The fourth grader said her mother had instructed her to take the shots to school and sell them 3 for $1 to make some money for Christmas. Nakowski said, well, what's wrong with that? It's enterprising. If the Amway people can do it, why not with Jello Shots?
Why not?
The gelatin was turned over to the Sheriff's Department for testing to see if it contained booze. The girl was suspended for violating school rules against possessing or trying to distribute a look-alike or something that appears to contain drugs or booze. Under the look-alike rule, the girl's suspension will stand no matter what the Sheriff's Department found. The school system's position is it doesn't matter if there's booze in it or not, Nowakowski said. The names of the girl and her mother were not released. The mother must also allow school officials to test her daughter's hair for signs of drug use, Nowakowski said. What is a Jello Shots have to do with drug use? It must be something there that doesn't meet the eye,
No booze in school.
That's what it sounds like to me, that whole story. Oh, and speaking of strange stories, boy, I sure have had a whole lot of crap here, Move on to Democratic Party. We own it. I like this story. It's about time we had some people with some balls, okay? The Democrats need to grow a pair instead of just sitting around and whining in despair. Liberal powerhouse MoveOn has a message for the professional election losers who run the Democratic Party. We bought it, we own it, we're going to take it back. To which I say,
all right.
Yeah! I say, like that. That's right. Just like the QM way. How many times did I say that yesterday?
Absolutely. About 30, man.
Yesterday was a day that will live in infamy, and it's really interesting because it was just a couple of days after Pearl Harbor Day. Even the Japs never saw a day like yesterday, unless maybe Nagasaki and Hiroshima. A scathing email from the head of MoveOn's Political Action Committee to the group's supporters on Thursday targets outgoing Democratic National Chairman at WIMP, Terry McAuliffe. He ain't even know Dick McAuliffe from the Tigers. Remember Dick McAuliffe?
No.
Josh?
No.
Come on. Left-handed second baseman, left-handed hitting, who used to hold the bat way up with that strange stance. Anyway, ripped the hell out of Terry McAuliffe as a tool of corporate donors who alienated both traditional and progressive Democrats. For years, the party's been led by elite Washington insiders who are closer to corporate lobbyists than they are to the Democratic base, said the email from MoveOn PAC's Eli Pariser. But we can't afford 4 more years of leadership by consulting class of professional election losers. Boy, that's sure. He said it just exactly the way it is. Professional election losers, man. They're the experts at it. Under McAuliffe's leadership, the message said the party coddled the same corporate donors that fund Republicans to bring in money at the expense of vision and integrity. Oh, integrity, what's that? In the last year, grassroots contributors like us gave more than $300 million to the Kerry campaign of the DNC and proved that the party doesn't need corporate cash to be competitive, the message be saying. Now it's our party. We own it. We bought it. We're going to take it back. Pariser urged MoveOn supporters to help support a DNC chair with a bold vision to represent Democrats outside Washington. Democrats will vote at their February meeting in Washington on a successor to McAuliffe. DNC spokesman Jano Cabrera declined to engage in a tit-for-tat with MoveOn, but praised McAuliffe's efforts. Oh, jeez, we're dancing on the edges now. Call me crazy, but I think the fact that for the first time in party history we outraised the Republicans and did so primarily through grassroots fundraising. See, there they are again. We did so through grassroots fundraising. Is something to be proud of, Cabrera said. See if I can do a little bit better this time. And by the way, I saw that picture of it. They were ugly. They're great if you were ugly. There.
All right.
You have to do like about a half a beat too soon, because otherwise you get this in there. And you know what you say about yeah. Among those vying for the party chairmanship is former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. We love you, Howie. You the man. That's the great white hope right there is Howard Dean. He lets out a scream. Right. In fact, next time when he runs, if he does run again, he's going to like that, and that'll get him in. I'm telling you, everybody at QM will vote for him. Of course, it'll be a whole new crew. An early darling of MoveOn's cyber network of activists when he ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, it says here. Howard Dean. He was the man, and that's the reason they ruined him, man. They spoiled him. They conspired with the media, and they just knocked him out of there, because even Karl Rove admitted that when the election was over, we were scared crapless of Howard Dean.
We
wanted
South
Kerry.
Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. We're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House.
You're listening to Neil Rogers.
According to a new Gallup poll, only about a third of Americans believe that Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is a scientific theory that's been well supported by the evidence, while just as many say that it's just one of many theories and has not been supported by the evidence. The rest say they just don't know enough to say. Furthermore, 45% of Americans also believe that God created human beings pretty much in their present form about 10,000 years ago. A third of Americans are biblical literates who believe that the Bible is the actual Word of God and is to be taken literally word for word. Oh, I forget what story this is from, but it says, well, that certainly explains a lot. Yeah, that explains it all right. That explains the results of that last election. That explains why the mugwumps are all over, not just in the red states, but dotted throughout even the blue states, all over the place. Mugwumps. See, I want to tell you a little, especially with the holidays here right now. If you participate in rituals of any kind, look in the mirror and say to yourself, I have been brainwashed, okay? No matter what it is, if you part like the lighting of the menorah and the tchotchkes with the Christmas tree and the nativity scene, all of this stuff, if you participate in any kind of religious rituals, then you are brainwashed. You need to be deprogrammed immediately, if not sooner. Get thee to a nunnery.